Welcome to LawFlip. It's a conversation about law, life, real estate, COVID-19, and everything in between. So I'm Benjy Smith, and we have Keith Pollock. He's a partner at Allen Mackins. He's a seasoned real estate lawyer representing borrowers, landlords, tenants, buyers, sellers, owners, developers. It's a crazy time in the world. It's particularly crazy with real estate, commercial real estate. Given the crisis, I thought it was particularly important to have Keith on to shed some light on how this is affecting the commercial real estate space. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to our newsletter, YouTube, etc. Let's flip the game upside down. All right, Keith, you're from New York, right?
I am from New York. I born and raised.
You like me? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Born
and raised in New York. I was a Long Island guy. I moved to the city. Practiced in New York for about 10 years before that. I only took a little trip to Wisconsin for undergrad. But then I went to Brooklyn Law School for another 3 years, practiced for 10. I was at a small firm to start very early on, then at a large firm, then at a medium-sized firm. So I've had the gamut of sort of New York firms, and then I moved to LA about 4.5 years ago to sort of get a better lifestyle.
We're happy to have you here in LA. Okay, I also practiced in New York as well, and I also went to Brooklyn Law School for a year, so we have that in common. So,
we do.
Okay, so how do you like the real estate practice at Allen Mackins?
I love it. I always say that if I was to hire lawyers to represent me, I think Allen Mackins would be the place that I would look. They're some of the best and brightest. All the partners are still very much working on every matter that they're a part of. They're lean and mean. They compete with the big boys. They're the best collection of partners that I've ever, and associates and staff and everything.
Yeah, I've had only positive experience with Allen Mackins. So how would you say that? What do you think the difference is between your practice in New York and California?
So, I mean, obviously, New York is a lot harder of an environment to sort of practice, but this is the truth though, I always felt like it was easier to get the deal done in New York because New Yorkers only really care about two different things. They care about time and money. LA and California, sometimes people just want to dwell on nuances a little bit. But I definitely like practicing out here better than I like practicing in New York. The people are nicer. They get deals done. They work really, really hard, but they still have a good time. So I like it better out here, and I'm happy that I sort of, I'm going to do the rest of my career out here.
Cool. Okay, so then why do we need real estate lawyers? So in California, we have real estate brokers, we have real estate salespeople. Why do we need a real estate lawyer?
Okay, so most people, when they have their experience with real estate, it means they're buying their house. And what they typically do is they do it with the brokers, because that's how it's done out in LA and pretty much all over California. They run it through escrow. The brokers draft the agreements, and then they buy their house, sell their house. And basically, a lawyer is never really involved on the residential front. That's not how it really works in New York. Typically, even residential people have lawyers on all sides. In fact, everybody in the table, from the title guy to the buyer to the seller, everybody has lawyers out there because they sit around a little table to get the deal done, and then they move on. Commercial, on the other hand, is a whole different animal. So in order to make sure that you're protected, you could take a broker form and rely on that if you don't want to hire a lawyer, but there's a lot of rules and regulations and things that go along on it when people sign leases or they enter a purchase and sale agreement. People always sort of poo-poo leases as being one of those things that you don't need a lawyer to get involved in, and it's actually the contrary, because usually these things last between 5 and 10 years, and you got to live with this agreement that has a lot of costs that can be hidden, different rights and remedies that the landlord may have, things you wouldn't even have considered if you didn't have a lawyer sort of take a look at it that's seasoned in the practice of landlord-tenant law. And to me, I think like any other service, you get what you pay for, and I think you should always have the best representing you at all times to make sure that you're always protected. I think it's the best money you'll spend.
Okay, that makes sense. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room, COVID.
COVID? Yeah,
COVID.
It's all COVID all the time.
It's all COVID all the time. All right, let's just go straight to it. I did real estate litigation for 10 years, and I think people just call any lawyer they know. So I don't do real estate anymore, but I'm getting flooded with calls. You must be getting just overwhelmed with calls. Let's just start with this. You're a landlord. If you're a landlord, what should you be doing right now?
I mean, it's hard to say of what aspect of this do you need to tackle right away. I think the first question is sort of how do you deal with owning a building and dealing with your tenants, right? In this situation. So this is sort of unprecedented. You have this virus that's running rampant throughout LA. It's very highly contagious. Somebody can press an elevator button and somebody that comes in next to it and press that elevator button accidentally touches their eyes, their nose, their mouth, and then all of a sudden they're infected with COVID. So, generally I think even if you haven't had an outbreak in your building, I think generally you should just do the increased cleaning of high traffic areas. I think you should consider posting notices telling people to follow the CDC guidelines. I think you should be making sure that your janitorial is sort of working overtime. But the governor and the different local municipalities took this sort of out of people's hands because they have this stay and shelter in place orders or stay at home, it's safer at home orders. So people aren't really going into the building. So to the extent you can have sort of a skeleton staff running or operating your building to the extent you need it open, you should, somewhat be doing that now and taking precautions.
Okay. And before we get to the specific provisions and clauses in the agreements, generally, what should tenants be trying to do right now?
Honestly, they should be reading number one, figure out if they have a problem, right? Because this is one of those things where it's going to trickle down to basically every aspect of every business everywhere. So you have a bunch of businesses that relied on income, and because of COVID, basically all the sales have stopped. So now all of a sudden, these businesses are going to have to figure out how to do their operating expenses and do leading stuff. So they may have employees that they need to furlough, and then they also have the operating expenses, which comes to paying rent is one of the things that they need to do. So in this case, you need to figure out whether or not you have a problem. And if the problem is that you can't pay rent because you really can't do it, then you need to start looking at the various provisions of your lease to see if you could, maybe have somewhat of an out. But the reality is that some of the arguments are going to be pretty tough to make.
Okay, let's just go through some of the arguments and whether or not there's a black and white answer to any of them. There's likely not, but let's just talk about what some of them are. So force majeure. What is a force majeure provision, and how is it playing out?
Well, number one, let's back up for a second. So as a tenant, the first thing you do is you typically have business interruption insurance. So I think the first thing that a tenant should probably do is check with their insurance provider to see if they're covered from insurance. The odds are they're probably likely not going to be covered. The insurance companies learn their lesson with SARS, so sometimes you have exclusions for infectious diseases. This isn't really a property damage argument right now, although people are probably going to try to make that argument. This is really just you're not able to operate your business. So, they should check with their insurance people first to see if they're even covered.
And you tender it in writing. You always got to tender that in writing. Don't just have a phone call about it. You should put that in writing to your insurance broker agent.
Well, I think that they should talk to their counsel first. I mean, we have an entire
through their counsel.
Yeah, let's just put this out here right off the bat. There is not one answer for every single person situation, from the owners to the borrowers to the tenants. Much of it has to do with your own documentation and what you have, what your rights and remedies are, and your specific economic situations, and also the different municipalities throughout all of California. I mean, there's LA, there's a whole bunch of different cities everywhere you go, plus the governor's order. So there's no real one true cut answer for anybody's question. So if you're expecting that on this podcast right now, you're just not going to get it. And frankly,
absolutely.
Yeah, and then the answer also is going to be that you should 100% make sure to check your own documentation that you have, if it's your lease, if it's your loan agreements and all your different loan documents, if it's, if the credit facility that you have, you need to make sure that you check those things before you even tender anything in writing or before you approach a landlord to do anything, or
okay.
A landlord approaching a bank.
Okay, so force majeure, what is it, and how is it likely to play out, or what are the issues around the force majeure?
Okay, so one of the biggest questions out here is whether or not you're excused from your obligations, right? And this typically comes up in a lease scenario. So most leases have a force majeure provision that basically says if some different circumstances happen you're excused from whatever your obligations are because of those actions. It typically comes up in riots, war, in typical strikes, and then quote unquote acts of God. So most leases typically have that provision within their lease, and they also don't typically exclude out outbreaks, epidemics, or pandemics, because the last time we had that was in 1918. So whether or not this is even going to qualify as sort of an act of God, I don't think the case law is settled on that yet, although I haven't done the research. And then the second thing is most provisions in these leases don't allow you to just not pay rent because of any of those things. So people have been trying to say, look, I just, the government won't let my employees go to the business, so what am I supposed to do? So how am I going to pay my rent if I have no operating income? So force majeure. But a long time ago, lawyers battled this out, and then what they did was create an exclusion in the force majeure provision that basically says, despite all these things happening, you actually still need to pay rent because nothing's really preventing you from sending a check or sending a wire. So that's, that argument to me is...
So that goes to like the core issue, which is people are wondering, okay, is this an out for me to get out of paying my rent? Is it an out to get out of paying your rent, Keith?
No, it's not. And frankly, doing just a looky-loo here just to see if you can get something for free is not what all these different, government orders are intended to do. And if you have the cash and you're supposed to pay your rent, you're supposed to comply with your contractual obligations, the first answer is you should do that. But if you have serious financial straits because of what's going on here, because you don't have operating thing, then you should figure out what your documents say and then approach the landlord, but with the guidance of counsel to understand sort of what the revenues are.
Yeah, and you must be getting flooded because people are legitimately hurting, and then people are probably taking advantage of the opportunity to think that they can renegotiate with their landlords. How are you seeing it? So I see landlords on the one hand having to stay firm because if they show any sort of real compassion in terms of engaging in a rent reduction, that opens the floodgates for all the other tenants. How are you seeing this play out?
Well, we see it all over the board. I mean, there's a couple of landlords who have taken the position that they're going to work with their tenants. They're not going to forgive or abate any of their rent, but they'll defer it towards the end of the term, and that's sort of the best case scenario of a landlord being sort of generous. And then there are other landlords who take the position that no, you have rental obligations, you're required to pay them, and you are not excused by any of the the four corners of the contract. And frankly, I think it shouldn't. This should be a real financial situation that a tenant is up against in order to sort of avail themselves of these things to begin with. But honestly, this sort of just started, so I don't really think that you're going to really see it for April as being truly problematic, although you may. I think if this thing goes on for another 30, 45 days, you're going to have a real problem, and then March is going to be a real issue.
And so what are you real? So right now, I imagine what you're seeing is tons of tenants are coming to you and saying, "I just can't pay it. What do I do?" And then we're
a landlord-heavy law firm.
Heavy law firm, yeah.
Yeah, so we represent a lot of landlords here. They're more worried about what happens if their tenants start doing that.
Sure.
The majority of them have been fairly lucky so far. People are just going about their business, paying their rent as they should, because they realize that they're not totally hurting yet. I don't know how much longer that will be the case if things drag on longer. I'm not saying we should stop this anytime soon. I think we should listen to the scientists. But at some point, you can't. Let's just do it from a sort of a thing that people can understand. If you're in your house and all of a sudden you lose all income, how many mortgage payments can you make? How many car payments can you make from your savings until you're totally depleted and need help? And that's happening not only on the individual basis where people are now getting fired left and right, and the unemployment went to 3.5 million people filed for unemployment, which probably doesn't include everybody. But businesses are also now not selling anything, so they're hurting as well. So right now it's not as much of a concern, although they're preempting it. I do think that the longer this drags out, the longer it's going to get worse for everybody.
How do you think it's going to play out? Where do you think the government's going to get involved? Where do you think the banks are going to get involved?
I have no idea. I mean, they passed that. They're going to pass the stimulus packet. It's going to provide some short-term relief. You've already seen a couple of the banks already saying that they're not going to charge penalties and interest. I think Wells Fargo, they're going to do a 90-day moratorium on it. And it's voluntary. It's not even one that's required by the government right now. So they're just choosing not to hurt their borrowers if they can't make a mortgage payment. Also, they're requesting documentation to show that you're truly in financial straits, which I think is the right move. I think you shouldn't just get free stuff. I think you should get stuff if you need it. And then again, I think it's up to the landlords and it's up to the banks to decide what they want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what other issues are you seeing? So let's just think about you own a building and somebody in your building, it gets reported to you, has COVID. What is your duty, if any, to let the other tenants in your building know about that and the like?
Well, it's sort of a balancing act right now. I mean, generally, I think, if you have a sort of a breakout or you're fully aware that somebody has tested positive for COVID, it's an actual test, you're fully confirmed, then I think first thing you need to do is, contact the County Department of Public Health in your jurisdiction to get guidance from them on the next steps, which probably includes limiting access to certain areas, making sure that there's a cleaning crew coming in. You should also make sure that the tenant who is infected is aware of the CDC guidelines. All your tenants now have to be aware of the CDC guidelines. I think you also need to generally inform the tenants of the building, but I think you need to be very careful not to disclose who it is or where it is or what company, because there's a lot of ADA requirements that go along with
Crazy times. So what about construction? So have you seen any guidance on either residential or commercial construction?
Yeah, so residential was carved out. I mean, I'm not an expert in construction, so speaking generally, I think everybody should just definitely go and check for themselves with their own attorneys. But I think generally construction is permissible at this point. I think that people were looking for clarification as to commercial stuff, and I think that at least in LA County it was permissible, but it widely varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So something in LA County may not be the same in another jurisdiction. So again, I'm going to preface this, California's set up with a million different jurisdictions, so no matter what, every single case needs to be on a case-by-case basis, and you need to look up the law in that particular jurisdiction.
Okay.
And what the order is in that particular jurisdiction.
That makes sense. And then as between all of your deals, what percentage are lease and what percentage are they sales?
So I do about 60 to 65% leasing work, and then the rest is acquisitions and sales and other miscellaneous items.
And are you seeing one more affected than the other right now?
I mean, the acquisitions and the sales, that's probably going to be the first to sort of, if you want to say, slow down, because the market that existed a month ago is no longer the market that exists today. So if you were heavily negotiating a document based on that market, the odds are you're probably going to reevaluate the price that you're paying, what kind of loan you could potentially get, what's going to happen with the net operating income of the building. So, if a client wasn't necessarily hard on a deal, that they may, some of them have taken a step back, some of them have extended their contingency periods.
Explain what hard means to people out there.
So just like when you're buying a house, you have sort of this earnest money deposit that you give, which is like 3%, and you do your inspections and different, your mold inspection, your general inspection, and then you decide whether or not you want to purchase, and at that point you waive all contingencies and then you close. It's the same thing with a commercial setting, except there's a lot more diligence that goes along with it. You're reviewing leases, you're doing a lot more inspections, you're the capital items in the house. So, but then again, I've also gotten 2 new sales, so I don't know really how this is going to play out yet. I think all of this is really early, but my hunch is that that's where it's going to get affected first. I think leasing, you're going to get a deluge of modifications of people deferring rent or abating rent or changing their lease terms in order to make sure that they're, they don't want to lose their tenants and they want to work with their tenants.
But that must be frustrating. It's frustrating for you because from a landlord's perspective, they're sort of, not only are they having to reduce their rent, but they're having to pay a lawyer to help them reduce their rent.
No,
but
I mean, you never want to lose your tenants, and usually these people have been around for so long and they've been good tenants. There are other landlords who take the position that you still owe us, whatever it is.
they got to salvage it.
Yeah, so I think you're going to see a whole bunch of modifications in the coming month or two, either between leasing or even your loan stuff, but it's going to be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
For every person's situation. Or you may not see anything, and then you kind of go back to the status quo and people have money. And if it ends sooner rather than later, then you may not see anything at all.
And how do you see this all affecting your litigation, your firm's litigation and, let's say, bankruptcy practice?
Okay, so when times are good, the real estate market sort of ticks up, and litigation sort of gets slow because people aren't really fighting about stuff. It's going to turn the other way. So our real estate practice may, potentially slow down if people decide not to start going out and buy stuff. But I'm hopeful that's not the case. And then litigation, as people fight, potentially would go higher.
That makes sense. All right, Keith, where's the hope in all of this?
It's got to end. It has to end. In 2000, and also here's the thing. We've all been through something that was as scary and as crazy as this back in 2008. And, I lived through that. I was part of, a large firm in New York City that we had a department, it was 500 plus attorneys. And I was a department of, basically 44 associates and partners. And by the time I left on my own accord, way after the whole crisis happened in 2008, we were down to 19 total. So, I've lived through these situations where it feels like it's the end of the world and the sky is falling. This one, there's an end to it. We're going to have a lot of pain along the way going through this, but, it's eventually it's going to run its course. It's going to go through, basically everybody's, immune systems. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of bad stuff that goes along with that. But it's going to eventually end, and then you're going to get that herd immunity, so it'll stop. The problem is ramping people back up right away. How do you get those 3.5 million people that just filed back to work? How do you get people to be less skittish about going to restaurants and being in a social setting at like a bar? Now that they've been sort of scarred in the way with this COVID, the same way that sort of like the Asian community was scarred by SARS. When, I used to see the mask and I'm like, why are they wearing that? Now I totally get why people would continue to wear masks going forward.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to make it through this. So let's go to our deal of the week. Keith, what is your deal of the week? It's a non-legal recommendation. Okay,
so my whole thought on this one is right now everybody's hurting. So support your local businesses. Go out and order that shirt or something that you're going to do from somebody that you may not have done. You need to start jump-starting the economy again, and one of the ways of doing that and helping people out is by giving them the business that you would have given or they would have had during the time that COVID didn't exist. So my big thing is going out and making sure that you support local businesses. One of my friends, he owns a warehouse full of food that was being distributed to restaurants. Clearly that need ended because people aren't dining out as much anymore, and even the takeout orders have sort of gone, have slowed. So he has this warehouse full of food, so now he's going out and actually doing it to consumer direct. So if somebody needs groceries and they don't want to brave the supermarkets, they should call him. And it's Nature's Produce is the name of the company. They're in Vernon, which is very close to downtown, and with no traffic anywhere in LA right now, you can get there in 20 minutes.
It's Blake Plisky's company, and if anybody needs the number or information, we'll give it to you.
Yeah. So that's to me.
That's your deal of the week.
That's the deal of the week.
Okay. My deal of the week is you're in close quarters, you're with your family, and it could be difficult. And one of the things that I've sort of realized, it's kind of obvious, but you need to examine your own actions inside of relationships, whether it's with family or friends. And what I've realized is you cannot rely on somebody else's behavior to determine your own. You can't say, well, if this other person does this, then I'll start acting with integrity, or I won't yell, or I won't scream. You have to, or I'll say what I've learned, and hopefully everybody else can learn, is that you really have to focus on the integrity of your own actions independent, separate, and apart from anybody else's actions. That's my deal of the week. And
wow,
now...
Zen. It's very zen right there. Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to... Go ahead.
People are making a joke that there's going to be a lot of Corona babies. I feel like there's going to be a lot of Corona divorces out there.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, let's hope less of divorces, more babies, but, let's be realistic. So we're on to the legal tip of the week. This is presented by Smith & Benowitz. It's a firm near and dear to me. It's my firm. And we do employment, personal injury, and class actions. And so, Keith, what we need is a legal tip of the week.
So, this is one of those things where right now there's no one answer to describe every single issue that every person is now dealing with. So the only thing I can say is before you do anything, like just decide to skip a rent payment or notify your tenants if there's a COVID case, or decide not to tell your bank that you're going to have trouble making the next payment, you need to review your documents with an attorney who can walk you through not only the documents, but what is going on in a particular jurisdiction. Right now, we have teams of people basically analyzing each jurisdiction when it comes to construction, when it comes to how force majeure clauses work. And what we've found is that we'd like to have this silver bullet to describe what you're supposed to do in every scenario, and it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's just, there's too many municipalities, there's too many jurisdictions, there's potentially too many orders within each jurisdiction. We generally have an idea of what to do and what direction to go, but you need to discuss each of those things with with an attorney that knows what they're doing. If it's not me or Benjy, call somebody else who's knowledgeable in this, who can walk you through it. Otherwise, you're going to get into a world of hurt that you just don't want to be in.
Perfect. Okay, so mine is just a really simple one. It's something you learn early on as an attorney, but it's something that it's unbelievably doesn't get done enough. Document everything that you do. So we have a lot of clients. They love to talk about conversations they had with employers or other people as it relates to claims that they have. And unfortunately, those conversations, while you can use them in court, it's just not as effective as having a contemporaneous documented interaction so that you can later introduce that into evidence, use it in some way. This relates to whether you're having a dispute with Best Buy, whether you're having a dispute with your employer, whether you're having a business dispute, whatever the case may be, you have to document things. So that's my legal tip of the week. Okay, now we have our sponsor, Rock Paper. We all know it's scary when you sign up for a subscription, but the trial period requires your credit card, right, Keith? That's a scary time.
That's a very scary thing to deal with.
Well, wouldn't it be great if you never had to submit your actual credit card number, or you could block the merchant from charging you until you could approve it?
Yes, I would, Benjy.
Well, Keith, that's how it is. So with Rock Paper, you create a proxy credit card on demand that's linked to your actual credit card or debit card. The merchant can only charge you when you say so, and you don't have to give your credit card to another third party. So in fact, I moved all of our subscriptions over to Rock Paper, and I want you to join the movement, rockpaper.com, rockpaper.com. Join the movement. All right, Keith.
Benjy.
In addition to being adorable, you're a great attorney. And we really, on all seriousness, we really appreciate your time coming on here. And I want, if you can, to let people know where they could find you and any parting words.
They can always find me online, Alan Mackins, Keith Pollock. It will pretty much pop up. We're down at 865 South Figueroa Street. Parting words is just, be safe and healthy out there. Social distancing is the key right now. We got to flatten this curve because there's nothing more that I want for everything to go back to sort of normal. And when it does, it's going to be a party for everybody. But
we're going to have a big party, Keith. A big party.
But we need to do it now and go through these pains now in order to make sure that we're all protected later. So
absolutely.
And thank you to all the health workers and the people that are on the front lines, like grocery store clerks. And
do you want to give your email and phone number?
Sure. 213-955-5521, and it's kpollock@alanmackins.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Keith. We appreciate it. Everybody, listen to Keith. Document what you're doing. Talk to a lawyer. Make sure that you don't make any moves before You talk to a lawyer. You read your documents. Don't be your own lawyer. A fool. Oh wait, a fool has. That line about a fool and a client having representing themselves. Well, I can't remember right now, but
the client who represents himself as a fool for a client.
Fool for a client. There we go. Okay, so we don't want any fools. So thank you, Keith. We really appreciate it. Take care. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.